May 1943, 60 feet above a German reservoir. A Lancaster bomber is shaking itself apart. Underneath the aircraft, a 9,250-pound cylinder is spinning at 500 revolutions per minute. The vibration is so violent the pilot can barely hold the controls steady. Two spotlights mounted beneath the fuselage project beams onto the water. When they converge into a figure of 8, the aircraft is at exactly the right height. Too high, and the bomb will shatter on impact. Too low, and the aircraft will hit the water. Ahead, anti-aircraft guns on the dam towers are firing directly at the cockpit. The pilot cannot climb, cannot weave, cannot deviate by a single foot from the attack run. Behind him, his commanding officer is flying alongside, deliberately drawing fire onto his own aircraft, so this one might survive long enough to release. The bomb aimer squints through a handmade wooden sight, 2 nails and a peephole. When the sluice towers align with the nails, he presses the release. The spinning cylinder drops away, hits the water at 232 miles per hour, and begins to bounce. This was the weapon that senior RAF commanders called tripe of the wildest description, the weapon that Wallis's own employer tried to stop him from developing, the weapon that would breach 2 of Germany's largest dams, unleash a catastrophic flood into the Ruhr Valley, and prove that precision bombing was possible when everyone said it was not. This is the story of Barnes Wallis and the bouncing bomb. Barnes Neville Wallis was not a weapons designer by training. Born in 1887 in Ripley, Derbyshire, he trained as a marine engineer before joining Vickers in 1913. His first major achievement was the R-100 airship, which successfully flew to Canada and back in 1930. During its development, Wallis invented geodetic construction, a lattice framework of intersecting curved members that distributed structural loads across the entire airframe. He applied this to the Vickers Wellington bomber, whose geodetic fuselage was so resilient that aircraft returned to base with enormous sections shot away but still structurally sound. Over 11,000 Wellingtons were built. By 1940, Wallis was assistant chief designer at Vickers Armstrongs in Weybridge, and had turned his attention to what he called an engineer's way of stopping the war. His paper, titled A Note on a Method of Attacking the Axis Powers, proposed destroying Germany's energy infrastructure using massive earthquake bombs. The paper was rejected. No aircraft could carry such a load, so Wallis found a different way. The problem facing British planners in 1940 was fundamental. Germany's war machine ran on water. The dams of the Ruhr Valley supplied hydroelectric power to steel mills, drinking water to cities, and cooling water to armaments factories. Destroy those dams and you could cripple German industry at its source. The challenge was that dams are almost impossible to destroy from the air. A gravity dam like the Murner is essentially a massive wedge of masonry, designed to resist enormous pressure. The Murner stood 130 feet high, 2,100 feet long, and 130 feet thick at its base. It held back 134 million cubic meters of water. Dropping conventional bombs on top of it achieved nothing. The concrete absorbed the blast. Near misses in the reservoir were even more useless. Water disperses explosive force in all directions. A bomb detonating even 30 feet from the dam wall would cause no structural damage whatsoever. The only way to crack such a structure was to detonate a massive charge directly against the upstream face, underwater, at the base of the wall. There, the water itself would become an ally. Instead of absorbing the blast, it would confine the explosive gases and channel the shockwave directly into the masonry. The weight of 134 million cubic meters of water would do the rest. The British already knew this. The problem was delivery. The dams were protected by steel anti-torpedo nets suspended in the water. Conventional bombing from altitude was hopelessly inaccurate. Circular error probable. The radius within which half of all bombs would land was measured in hundreds of yards. Against a target requiring a direct hit, high-altitude bombing was essentially random. Barnes Wallis solved both problems with a single insight. A weapon spinning backwards would skip across the surface of the water like a stone. It would clear the torpedo nets entirely. When it struck the dam wall, residual backspin would cause it to crawl down the upstream face rather than bouncing away. It would sink to the optimal depth while maintaining contact with the masonry. Then it would detonate. The physics was sound. Backspin creates lift through the Magnus effect, giving the bomb a gentler angle of water impact. The gyroscopic effect of a spinning cylinder keeps its rotational axis horizontal, preventing tumbling, and a backspinning object decelerates after release, trailing behind the aircraft rather than travelling beneath it. This last point was critical. 6,600 pounds of Torpex explosive detonating directly beneath a Lancaster would destroy the aircraft that delivered it. The backspin innovation reportedly came from an unexpected source. Vickers designer George Edwards, who also played cricket, suggested applying backspin to the weapon, drawing on an idea informed by ballistics and sport. Wallis adopted the principle and it worked. Wallis began testing in early 1942 with his daughter's marbles, a homemade catapult, and a tin bath of water in his garden in Effingham, Surrey. He progressed to golf balls, then weighted spheres, then scale models dropped from a Vickers Wellington over Chesil Beach. By February 1943, he had achieved skips of over 1,300 yards. He filmed everything. The opposition he faced was extraordinary. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command, wrote that the bouncing bomb was just about the maddest proposition as a weapon we have yet come across. He warned that the war will be over before it works, and it never will. Wallis's own employer, Vickers chairman Sir Charles Craven, called him a damn nuisance and forbade him from working on the project. Wallis offered his resignation. The breakthrough came when Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal, Chief of the Air Staff, watched the Chesil Beach films. On 26 February 1943, Portal overruled Harris and ordered 30 Lancasters allocated for the mission. This gave approximately 8 weeks to design the full-size weapon, modify the aircraft, form and train a new squadron, and execute the raid before summer lowered reservoir levels. Full-scale testing at Reculver in Kent nearly killed the project. The spherical wooden casing that enclosed the cylindrical explosive charge repeatedly shattered on impact with the water. Engineers tried strengthening the casing. It still shattered. They tried different wood. It still shattered. The turning point was accidental. During one failed test, the outer sphere disintegrated, but the inner cylinder continued bouncing across the water perfectly. Wallis abandoned the sphere entirely and tested the bare cylinder. It worked on 29 April, just 3 weeks before the raid. The final live test occurred on 13 May 1943, 3 days before the operation. A fully armed Upkeep bounced 7 times over 800 yards, sank and detonated at 33 feet depth. According to wartime records, approximately 120 units were manufactured, both live weapons and concrete-filled practice versions. The final weapon was a steel cylinder 60 inches long and 50 inches in diameter, weighing 9,250 pounds with 6,600 pounds of Torpex explosive. Torpex was approximately 50% more powerful than TNT by mass, and the aluminium component extended the duration of the underwater shockwave. A Vickers hydraulic motor spun the bomb backwards at 500 RPM before release. 3 hydrostatic pistols detonated the charge when water pressure corresponded to 30 feet depth. Now, before we see how this performed in combat, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British engineering, consider subscribing. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Right, let us get to the raid itself. Release parameters were extraordinarily precise. 60 feet altitude, about 230 miles per hour ground speed, 425 to 475 yards from the target. Altitude was measured by 2 converging wildest spotlights, a system developed under the Ministry of Aircraft Production. Distance was judged using a handmade wooden triangular sight with 2 nails positioned, so that when the dam's sluice towers aligned with them, the aircraft was at the correct range. 23 Avro Lancaster B Mark III Specials were converted at Avro's Woodford factory, with bomb bay doors removed, V-shaped caliper arms to hold the cylinder externally, the hydraulic spinning motor, and the twin spotlight altimeters. The mid-upper turret and much internal armour were stripped to save weight. The last modified aircraft was delivered on 14 May 1943, 2 days before the operation. 617 Squadron was formed on 21 March 1943 at RAF Scampton under Wing Commander Guy Gibson, a highly experienced pilot with over 100 operational sorties behind him. He assembled 21 crews totalling 147 men, including 28 Canadians, 13 Australians, 2 New Zealanders, and 1 American who had joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. Training lasted 7 weeks, flying at night over English reservoirs at heights that terrified even experienced bomber crews. On the night of 16 to 17 May 1943, 19 Lancasters took off in 3 waves. The primary targets were the Muna and Eder dams. The secondary target was the Sorpe, an earthen embankment dam with a concrete core that the bouncing bomb technique was essentially useless against. Wallis had estimated 5 correctly placed bombs were needed to crack the Sorpe. Only 2 aircraft would ever reach it. The second wave, assigned to the Sorpe, was devastated before reaching the target. Flight Lieutenant Barlow hit power lines near Rees and crashed, killing all 7 crew. The Germans recovered his intact Upkeep and later built a failed copy. Pilot Officer Byers was shot down over the Dutch coast. Pilot Officer Rice flew so low over the IJsselmeer that his bomb was ripped off by the water. Flight Lieutenant Monroe took flak damage that destroyed his intercom and had to turn back. Only Flight Lieutenant Joe McCarthy, the American who had joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, reached the Sorpe. He was 34 minutes late after having to switch to a spare aircraft at the last moment. The first wave, led by Gibson, reached the Muna shortly after midnight. Gibson attacked first. His bomb bounced 3 times, struck the dam wall and detonated. The dam held. Flight Lieutenant Hopgood attacked next and was hit by flak. His bomb dropped late and overshot. His aircraft climbed to 500 feet before its wing disintegrated. 5 crew died. Gibson then did something that earned him the Victoria Cross. He flew repeatedly alongside subsequent attacking aircraft, deliberately drawing anti-aircraft fire onto himself so others might complete their runs. Flight Lieutenant Martin's bomb veered off-centre. Squadron Leader Young's bomb struck dead centre and detonated. Then Flight Lieutenant Maltby approached. On his attack run, Maltby's rear gunner could already see the dam wall crumbling from Young's hit. Maltby's bomb bounced 4 times and struck the weakened structure. At 12:56, Gibson transmitted the code word confirming the Muna was breached. The gap measured roughly 250 feet across and nearly 300 feet deep. An enormous volume of water was released, surging downriver toward the Ruhr Valley. Gibson led the remaining bomb-carrying aircraft to the Eder. The approach was even more dangerous. A steep dive over a promontory called the Hammersberg before levelling at 60 feet over water. Flight Lieutenant Shannon made 6 abortive runs before succeeding on his 7th. His bomb hit, but the dam held. Squadron Leader Maudslay's bomb struck the parapet and detonated on contact, severely damaging his own aircraft. Pilot Officer Les Knight made 1 dummy run, then dropped his bomb perfectly. The rear gunner saw the dam collapse. At approximately 1:52, Gibson transmitted the signal confirming the Eder was breached. 8 Lancasters were lost. 53 aircrew were killed and 3 captured. The casualty rate was 40%. At the Sorpe, McCarthy faced an entirely different challenge. The earthen embankment dam could not be attacked with the standard bouncing approach. There was no vertical masonry face for the bomb to roll down. Instead, he had to fly along the dam's crest rather than toward it. Threading between a church steeple and a hillside with only seconds of level flight, he made 10 runs before his bomb aimer was satisfied. The bomb was dropped directly onto the dam without spinning and blew away a section of the crest, but the earthen embankment absorbed the blast. Flight Sergeant Brown from the reserve wave also reached the Sorpe after 8 runs and achieved another hit, but again failed to breach it. The Muna breach released the majority of the reservoir's 134 million cubic meters at a peak discharge rate of approximately 8,800 cubic meters per second. The flood wave was 10 meters high. It destroyed 11 factories outright and damaged over 100 more, washed away 25 bridges, and knocked out 2 hydroelectric power stations. The Eder released over 150 million cubic meters from its even larger reservoir. That technical victory carried a terrible human price, one the planners had not fully accounted for. The human cost demands honest reckoning. German historian Ralph Blank estimates at least 1,650 people died, though figures vary across sources. Approximately 1,000 of the bodies found were foreign forced labourers and prisoners of war, predominantly Soviet women and girls brought to work in Ruhr factories. Over 800 people perished in the town of Neheim alone, including several hundred female Soviet forced labourers, locked in barracks unable to escape the floodwaters. Guy Gibson later wrote uneasily that the fact that people might drown had not occurred to us. No one likes mass slaughter, and we did not like being the authors of it. Albert Speer flew over the devastation on the morning of 17 May and immediately organised repairs. 7,000 organisation TOT workers were transferred from Atlantic Wall construction. The Muna Dam was repaired by 23 September 1943, approximately 4 months later. Speer later expressed puzzlement that Bomber Command never followed up with conventional raids during reconstruction. The strategic significance of Operation Chastise remains debated. Harris called it a failure, writing that it achieved nothing compared with the effort and loss. The dams were repaired within months. German armaments production continued to rise through 1943, and the wrong secondary target was hit. The Eder served primarily agriculture and navigation, while the Sorpe, which served a Ruhr industry, survived, but the dismissive assessment misses the broader impact. Historian James Holland points out that workers were pulled from Atlantic Wall construction to repair the dams, potentially weakening D-Day defences a year later. Anti-aircraft batteries were permanently committed to dam defence thereafter, and critically, Operation Chastise validated Barnes Wallis's deep penetration bombing theories. Wallis went on to design the 12,000-pound Tallboy and 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bombs. 617 Squadron delivered them. On 12 November 1944, Tallboys sank the battleship Tirpitz. Grand Slams collapsed the Bielefeld Viaduct and destroyed U-boat pens that conventional bombing could not touch. None of those weapons would have existed without Chastise proving Wallis's theories in combat. No other nation fielded a successful operational equivalent. Germany recovered an intact Upkeep from a crashed Lancaster and built a prototype codenamed Kurt, but crucially failed to understand the importance of backspin. Without it, the bomb travelled at the aircraft's speed and endangered the delivery plane. Several hundred units were reportedly produced before the project was abandoned. None was ever used operationally. Britain was uniquely positioned for this weapon. Wallis's structural engineering genius developed through geodetic aircraft design, the Lancaster's unique payload capacity, larger than any comparable bomber, RAF expertise in night low-level operations refined over years of combat, and the strategic imperative of an island nation whose only means of striking Germany's industrial heartland was through the air. 617 Squadron's motto, chosen after the raid, was Après moi le déluge, after me, the flood. It remains the most precisely literal squadron motto in military aviation history. The squadron still serves today, now flying F-35 Lightning fighters from RAF Marham. The 1955 film The Dam Busters showed spherical bombs because the actual cylindrical design was still classified under the Official Secrets Act. The popular image of a bomb skipping gracefully dozens of times like a stone is misleading. At operational parameters, the weapon bounced approximately 7 times over 800 yards before sinking, but the principle was proven. It validated Wallis's methods and influenced precision bombing doctrine for decades. The bouncing bomb looked insane. Senior commanders said it would never work. The timeline was impossible. The casualties were horrific. But on the night of 16 May 1943, a spinning cylinder dropped from 60 feet, bounced across a German reservoir, sank against a dam wall, and detonated at exactly the right depth. British engineering solved what physics said could not be solved. Barnes Wallis proved that unconventional thinking could achieve what conventional wisdom declared impossible. Harris was wrong. The cylinder bounced, the dams broke, and